I pressed my forehead against the cold hospital window, watching the rain slide down in crooked lines. The doctor's words still rang in my ears, sharp as broken glass. Without the transplant, she won't make it. 16 years old, my life reduced to numbers on a chart. I turned, expecting comfort, maybe even panic on my parents' faces. Instead, I saw them whispering about flowers and guest lists, their voices soft but steady. My sister's wedding. Their eyes lit with plans while my future flickered out behind me. That was the night I learned the truth. My life was not their priority. And one day, they'd regret underestimating me. Mornings in our house were always noisy. Not the kind of laughter-filled noise you might hope for, but the sharp clatter of dishes, the thud of footsteps on hardwood, and the constant ring of my mother's phone as she juggled vendors and wedding details. I would sit at the kitchen table, a chipped mug of tea warming my hands, watching the chaos swirl around me like I didn't belong in it. My father read the newspaper, nodding absently whenever my mother demanded his approval. He was a tall man, graying at the temples, but when he held the paper up it felt like a wall between us. I often wondered if he preferred it that way. My sister, Rachel, floated through the room like she was born for spotlights. Hairstyled, nails painted, her smile perfectly practiced. She hardly glanced at me unless she needed something. To them, I was quiet background noise. Still, I carved out my little rituals. Before school, I'd take 10 minutes to sit on the back porch, breathing in the cool morning air. The garden wasn't much, patchy grass, a few stubborn roses, but it was mine. The smell of wet earth steadied me, and the silence there belonged only to me. On good days, I'd scribble in my worn notebook, sketching half-finished poems no one ever saw. Words were my secret refuge, a way to remind myself I still had a voice, even when no one listened. At school, I wasn't popular, but I wasn't invisible either. I had a couple of friends who stuck by me. Lena, with her quick wit, and Jonah, who shared his playlists whenever I looked tired. They knew I was often sick, though I never explained why. When the fatigue hit, when climbing stairs felt like scaling a mountain, I brushed it off with jokes. I didn't want pity. I wanted to be normal. But my body told another story. Some mornings, my legs ached so badly I'd bite the inside of my cheek just to distract myself while walking. I hid the bruises, the ones that showed up without reason. I carried Band-Aids in my bag, not because I needed them for cuts, but because they kept questions away. I knew something was wrong long before the hospital confirmed it. Despite the heaviness pressing in on me, there were flickers of light. My uncle, David, often visited in the evenings. He wasn't loud or commanding, but he noticed things. The way I held my fork, the way I leaned against the wall when standing too long. He asked real questions, the kind that didn't skim the surface. "How's the writing?" he'd say, eyes crinkling at the corners. When I answered, he actually listened. Around him, I felt visible, like I mattered. Life in our house revolved around Rachel's wedding. Conversations were measured in budgets, venues, and color schemes. Even the walls seemed to echo her name. When relatives visited, they congratulated my parents, gushing over Rachel's perfect match and beautiful future. No one asked me how I was doing. I learned to keep my silence, storing my feelings like fragile glass bottles on a shelf, too afraid they'd shatter if I let them fall. At night, lying in bed, I listened to the muffled hum of wedding plans drifting through the walls. I stared at the ceiling, the faint glow of my nightlight catching the cracks in the paint, and thought about the unfairness of it all. 16 years old, and I already felt like a ghost in my own home, a shadow at someone else's celebration. But I clung to one truth. I was still here. My heart still beat, my lungs still filled. Even if my parents didn't notice, I noticed. And deep down, I promised myself I wouldn't let them erase me so easily. The first sign came one morning in gym class. We were running laps, and halfway through, my legs gave out like someone had pulled the floor from under me. The whistle blew, laughter echoed, and I sat there, clutching my knees, humiliated. Later, when I pulled off my socks at home, dark bruises bloomed across my shins. They looked like fingerprints, though no one had touched me. I showed my mother. "It's nothing," she said, barely glancing up from the wedding catalog in her lap. "You probably bumped into something." But I knew I hadn't. Weeks passed. I was tired all the time, my skin pale, my appetite gone. When I finally convinced her to take me to the doctor, I hoped, she'd realize something was wrong. The sterile smell of antiseptic clung to the air as they drew vial after vial of blood. I remember the nurse's gentle voice. "You're very brave." I clung to that, because the truth in the doctor's eyes scared me before he even spoke. "Leukemia," he said, the word heavy and final. My stomach dropped, a hollow ache spreading through my chest. He explained survival rates, treatment plans, the urgency of a bone marrow transplant. He stressed how quickly we needed to act. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to squeeze my hand, to tell me we'd get through it together. Instead, she asked, "How long would treatment take?" "My daughter's wedding is in 2 months." The silence that followed was louder than anything I'd ever heard. The doctor blinked, clearly taken aback. He repeated, more firmly this time, that without immediate action, my chances would shrink. My father cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably, but he didn't argue with her. He didn't even look at me. I wanted to scream, to beg them to choose me. But I sat frozen, staring at my shoes, the laces frayed, the rubber soles smudged. It was easier to look at the ground than at their faces. That night, I overheard them in the kitchen. Their voices floated through the thin walls, sharp and deliberate. "We can't cancel the wedding, Mark. Do you know how humiliating that would be? People have already booked flights." My mother's tone was clipped, matter of fact. "And what about Emily?" my father asked, his voice lower, hesitant. "She'll be fine," my mother snapped. "We'll manage both. But the wedding comes first. Rachel deserves her day." The words landed like blows. I pressed my face into the pillow, biting it until my jaw ached, trying not to sob loud enough for them to hear. The following weeks blurred. Instead of consultations with specialists, I sat through endless dress fittings, venue tours, and rehearsals. My mother shoved invitations into my hands, asking me to help address envelopes, as if the act of writing names in neat script could distract me from my body weakening day by day. Rachel strutted through it all, glowing in her role as the bride-to-be. When I tried to bring up my illness, she rolled her eyes. "Don't make this about you, Emily. This is my time." Her words cut deeper than the diagnosis. I realized then that she didn't see me as her sister anymore, just an obstacle, a shadow threatening to dim her spotlight. One afternoon, I collapsed in the bathroom. The tiles were cold against my cheek, and for a moment, I let myself imagine never standing again. My mother found me there, frowned, and said, "You need to rest. Don't overdo it. We can't have you fainting during the reception." Not because I was sick, not because she cared, but because it might ruin the photos. That was betrayal in its purest form. The only person who noticed the truth was Uncle David. He showed up one evening with takeout, his eyes scanning my face, the hollows beneath my eyes, the way I leaned against the wall. "What's going on?" he asked quietly. I hesitated, but when he pressed, the words spilled out. The diagnosis. The transplant. The wedding. My parents' silence. His jaw tightened, anger flickering across his features. He didn't interrupt, didn't dismiss me. He just listened, and when I was done he said, "Emily, you are not invisible. I see you. And we're going to fight for you." For the first time in weeks, I felt the tightness in my chest ease. Someone believed me. Someone cared enough to stand beside me. But deep inside, a seed of bitterness had already been planted. Every laugh from my sister, every whispered plan from my parents watered it. I realized I wasn't just sick. I was abandoned. And that kind of pain didn't fade. It sharpened. I didn't know it then, but that betrayal would become the fire that fueled me. The fire that would one day burn away every lie they built around Rachel's perfect day years past. But the memory of that betrayal never left me. Treatment had been grueling, but thanks to Uncle David's persistence, and the match he fought to find, I survived. Survived, but not unchanged. My body carried scars, my veins ached from years of needles, and fatigue lingered like an unwelcome guest. I was 22 now, studying literature at a small college nearby, building a quiet life that felt like my own. I had cut off most contact with my parents, though David kept me updated out of caution more than affection. He didn't want me blindsided. Still, when the invitation arrived in the mail, a glossy card tucked in an envelope that smelled faintly of my mother's perfume. I wasn't prepared. "You are cordially invited." It read embossed in gold letters. My sister, Rachel, was renewing her vows. 10 years married, and apparently, it wasn't enough to have had one perfect day. She wanted another. A bigger venue. A larger guest list. And once again, I was expected to sit quietly in the background, proof that our family was whole. At first, I laughed. The kind of laugh that feels hollow, jagged at the edges. But when I called David to tell him, my voice shook. "They're doing it again," I whispered. "Emily," he said gently, "you don't owe them anything." But I couldn't shake the bitterness clawing up my throat. I thought I had buried it, thought I had moved on. Yet here it was, rising from the grave, alive as ever. A week later, my parents invited me to dinner. The same dining room table I'd grown up around, polished to a shine, set with candles and my mother's best china. The smell of roasted chicken and rosemary filled the air. It should have felt warm, comforting. Instead, I felt like a guest in a stranger's home. Rachel arrived late, of course, sweeping in with a designer dress and a perfume trail that filled the room before her voice did. She hugged my mother, kissed my father on the cheek, and finally glanced at me. "Well, look who's here," she said, her smile tight. "You look healthy." I forced a smile, though her words hung heavy, a reminder of what she thought I shouldn't have been. Alive. As we ate, my mother launched into her favorite subject, the upcoming ceremony. "Emily," she said, her fork tapping against her plate, "we'll need you to help with the seating chart. And maybe you can write a little speech? Something touching, about family and resilience. People love those kinds of things." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "You want me to write about resilience?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Yes," she said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. It would mean so much to Rachel. Rachel smirked, sipping her wine. "Don't be dramatic, Emily. It's just a few words." I set my fork down, my appetite gone. The clinking of silverware around me felt like a drumbeat in my skull. They wanted me to stand there, in front of their guests, and turn my pain into a performance. To pretend we were a family that stood by each other, when the truth was the opposite. I looked at my father, hoping for some flicker of understanding. He avoided my gaze, focusing instead on cutting his chicken into perfect, even slices. In that silence, something inside me cracked. The years of bitterness, the long nights replaying their betrayal, all of it surged to the surface. I realized they hadn't changed, not in the slightest. To them, I was still a prop, a symbol, a background piece in Rachel's endless celebration. After dinner, as we stood by the door, my mother pressed her hand on my shoulder. "This is important, Emily. Don't let us down again." Again. The word hit harder than she knew. As if my illness, my survival, had been some kind of failure. That night, lying in my apartment bed, I couldn't sleep. The city hummed outside, car horns, distant voices, but inside, my head was loud with memory. 16-year-old me, lying on the bathroom floor. 16-year-old me, listening to my parents choose flowers over chemo. 16-year-old me, silenced, erased. I sat up, heart pounding, breath uneven. They wanted me to stand at Rachel's vow renewal and polish their image. But I wasn't 16 anymore. For the first time in years, I let the thought rise fully, without shame or fear. What if I told the truth? The idea scared me, thrilled me, steadied me. My parents wanted a flawless show. Rachel wanted a spotlight without shadows. But I had the power to expose the cracks in their perfect stage. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop being silent. Sleep abandoned me that night. I lay in bed, staring at the faint orange glow from the street lamp filtering through my curtains, and counted the cracks in the ceiling like they might hold the answers. My body felt heavy, drained, but my mind spun in endless circles. Every time I closed my eyes, I was 16 again, small, trembling, begging silently for someone to choose me. I heard my mother's voice in the kitchen that night, cold and decisive. "The wedding comes first." I heard Rachel's dismissal. "Don't make this about you." And now, years later, they wanted me to stand on a stage and deliver a speech about resilience? The irony was suffocating. I rolled onto my side, pressing my face into the pillow, my chest tightening as if the air itself was against me. It wasn't just anger, it was grief. Grief for the family I never truly had. Grief for the girl I once was who thought love was unconditional. Around 3 a.m., I gave up on pretending to sleep. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and paced the small space of my apartment. The floorboards creaked under my bare feet. My hands trembled as I filled a glass of water, but I barely drank it. Instead, I stared at my reflection in the dark window, my face pale, my eyes shadowed but alive. Against all odds, alive. Why am I still letting them own me? I whispered into the empty room. My voice cracked, but hearing it out loud shifted something inside me. For years, I'd carried their betrayal like a chain. I told myself survival was enough, that living quietly was my revenge. But was it? I thought about the invitation, the dinner, the smug tilt of Rachel's smile. They didn't see me as a survivor. They saw me as someone to exploit, a symbol to decorate their story. That realization ignited something sharp and undeniable. I opened my old notebook, the one I hadn't touched in months. Its pages were yellowed, corners curled, but it still smelled faintly of ink and coffee. I flipped through half-finished poems, scribbled lines of thought, until I found a blank page. I wrote one sentence, the words shaky but determined. I will not be their silence anymore. Tears blurred the ink, but I didn't stop. I poured everything onto the page. The hospital windows streaked with rain. The taste of iron in my mouth after fainting. The sound of my mother's voice choosing flowers over me. Every moment I had swallowed down, every word I had buried, spilled free. My pen scratched furiously until the sky outside began to lighten. When I finally set the pen down, my hand ached, my eyes burned, but I felt lighter. It wasn't a plan yet, not really, but it was a beginning. The next morning, I dragged myself out of bed, exhausted but strangely steady. I made coffee, the bitter scent filling the air, and sat at the kitchen table with my notebook open in front of me. My mind replayed my mother's request. Write something touching about family and resilience. Fine. I would write something. But not the performance they expected. The thought both terrified and thrilled me. I imagined standing at that podium, their guests watching, my parents smiling smugly, Rachel glowing in her white dress. And then, my words cutting through the illusion, shattering their perfect image. The truth laid bare, not just for them, but for everyone. Doubt followed close behind. What if no one believed me? What if I looked bitter, ungrateful? What if speaking up only left me more isolated than before? I pressed my palms against the table, grounding myself. No, that wasn't the 16-year-old me anymore. I had spent too many years minimizing my pain, second-guessing my worth. The truth was mine, and no one could take it from me. That night, when David called to check in, I hesitated before telling him. I think I'm going to do it, I said softly. Do what? Tell them. At the vow renewal. Not the version they want. The truth. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then he sighed, not with disapproval, but with something like relief. Emily, I think you've been waiting to do this for years. His words settled in my chest like an anchor. He was right. I had been waiting for the strength, waiting for the moment when I finally valued myself more than their approval. As I hung up the phone, I felt the fire steady inside me. Not a raging blaze, but a quiet, determined flame. I wasn't doing this out of spite, though anger was there, sharp as ever. I was doing it because I deserved to be seen. Because the truth deserved air. Because silence had been killing me long after the disease had gone. And this time, I would not be erased. The idea sounded simple enough. Write the speech, stand at the podium and tell the truth. But reality is rarely simple. I sat at my desk with my notebook open, pen in hand, trying to shape my words into something that would pierce without collapsing into bitterness. The first draft read like a rant, raw, furious, dripping with accusation. I crumpled it up. The second was too poetic, as if I were hiding behind metaphor instead of speaking plainly. By the fourth attempt, my trash bin overflowed with balled-up paper. What am I even doing? I muttered, burying my face in my hands. Self-doubt gnawed at me. Was this revenge or justice? Would anyone in that audience even care? They were Rachel's friends, my parents' circle of business associates. To them, I was a footnote. Why should my truth matter to them? I nearly convinced myself to abandon the idea altogether. But then, one evening, while scrolling absent-mindedly through old photos on my phone, I found a picture of myself in the hospital. My skin pale, my head wrapped in a scarf, a small smile forced for the camera. Behind me, the window streaked with rain. I remembered that moment, the loneliness, the aching silence from the people who should have been at my side. I couldn't let that version of me down. So I started over. Each night after classes, I'd sit at my desk, lamp casting a soft circle of light, and write. I stripped away the anger, left only the bones of the truth. It took weeks, but slowly the words came together. David read it first. He came over one rainy evening, his coat dripping on my rug, and sat at my table while I slid the pages toward him. His eyes moved steadily across the lines, his jaw tightening, his fingers tapping lightly against the paper. When he finished, he looked up. This isn't just good, Emily. It's powerful. But you have to be ready for the fallout. I nodded, though my stomach churned. The weeks leading up to the ceremony tested me. My mother called constantly with reminders. The dress code, the schedule, the seating chart she wanted me to double-check. I kept my voice steady, agreeing to whatever she asked, all while hiding the truth in plain sight. Rachel called once too, her voice syrupy sweet. Just make sure you don't drag it out, okay? People want to hear about love, not, other stuff. Her laugh followed, light and careless, but it sliced through me. Nights grew restless again. Sometimes I'd wake drenched in sweat, convinced I was back in the hospital. Other times, doubt whispered louder than my determination. What if they turn on you? What if your words mean nothing? The worst moment came 2 days before the ceremony. I received an email from my mother with an attached draft of the speech she had written for me. Family is the backbone of resilience. Today, as I watch my sister renew her vows, I'm reminded of how our love carried us through challenges. We stood together then, and we stand together now. My hands shook as I read it. Not a word of it was mine. It was polished, perfect, and a lie. She wanted to control even this. I called David, my voice cracking. Maybe I shouldn't do it. Maybe I should just read this and get it over with. It would be easier. No, he said firmly. Easy isn't the same as right. Emily, they've been writing your story your whole life. Don't let them write this chapter too. His certainty steadied me. The morning of the ceremony, I woke early. My stomach churned, my hands cold, but a strange calm settled over me. I put on the dress my mother had insisted I wear, a pale blue thing that felt too delicate for my body, but beneath it, tucked in my bag, were my own words, folded neatly. At the venue, a grand hall filled with flowers and music, everything shimmered with perfection. Guests laughed, clinking glasses, their voices mingling with the soft strains of a string quartet. My parents glided from table to table, radiant with pride. Rachel sparkled in her gown, basking in the attention like it was sunlight. I sat quietly, rehearsing the speech in my head, the paper burning in my purse. But just before the ceremony began, I faltered. Watching them all, so confident, so sure of their world, I felt small again. A shadow. My chest tightened, panic rising. What if I choked? What if my voice trembled? What if they laughed? I slipped out into the hallway, gripping the railing to steady myself. The hum of conversation behind the doors felt miles away. Breathe, I whispered, forcing air into my lungs. Footsteps approached. David appeared, his tie slightly askew, his eyes finding mine instantly. You're scared, he said gently. I nodded, unable to speak. That's good, he added. It means you care about the truth. And you know what? Fear doesn't cancel strength. Sometimes, they walk together. His words sank deep, anchoring me. I straightened, clutched the folded pages tighter, and whispered, I can do this. When the doors opened again, I walked back inside. The ceremony unfolded like a performance. Vows exchanged, kisses applauded, music swelling. Then came the moment my mother had orchestrated, the speeches. As Rachel beamed at me, I stepped up to the podium. The microphone hummed softly, the lights warm on my skin. I unfolded my paper. My hands shook, but my voice, when it came, was steady. Family is supposed to be where love begins, I said, the room falling silent. But sometimes family teaches us what betrayal feels like. Gasps rippled through the hall. My parents' smiles froze. Rachel's eyes narrowed. And for the first time in years, I felt powerful. My voice trembled at first, but once the words left me, they carried their own weight. When I was 16, I continued, eyes fixed on the audience rather than my parents. I was diagnosed with leukemia. The doctors told us I needed treatment immediately. A transplant, chemotherapy, every resource we could gather. But instead of rallying around me, my family had other priorities. Murmurs swept through the crowd. Glasses clinked down onto tables, forks stilled in midair. They chose flowers over chemo, guest lists over hospital visits, my sister's wedding over my life. Rachel shifted in her chair, her smile gone, color rising to her cheeks. My mother's face tightened, lips pressed thin. My father's gaze dropped to his lap. I took a breath, steadying myself. I remember lying in a hospital bed, too weak to walk, staring out at the rain, wondering if I mattered at all. Wondering if my life was worth saving when the people who should have loved me most acted like it wasn't. That's the truth I've carried with me for years. The silence was heavy, thick, but I didn't let it swallow me. You asked me to speak about resilience, I said, turning briefly toward my mother. So here it is. Resilience isn't built from family dinners or pretty speeches. It's built when you're abandoned and somehow survive anyway. It's built when the uncle you barely saw growing up becomes your lifeline because your parents wouldn't step up. It's built when you learn that your voice, your truth, is the only thing that can keep you alive. David's eyes met mine across the room, steady, proud. Rachel stood suddenly, her chair scraping the floor. This is ridiculous, she snapped, her voice high, brittle. She's exaggerating, twisting things. She always had a flair for drama. A guest near the back muttered, "Why would she lie about that?" Another whispered, "I never saw them at the hospital." The ripple spread, doubt carving cracks in the polished image my family had crafted. My mother's hands clenched around her napkin. "Emily, that's enough. Sit down before you embarrass yourself." I faced her fully, my voice calm now. "I'm not embarrassed. I survived. You should be." Gasps followed, sharper this time. Someone set down their glass with a thud. The string quartet shifted uncomfortably, bows hovering above their instruments. Rachel's husband, sitting stiffly beside her, avoided her eyes. He looked at me instead, something unreadable flickering across his face, maybe pity, maybe recognition of truth. I went on, softer but firmer. "This isn't about revenge. It's about truth. For too long, I've been silent while you polished your reputation. But silence almost killed me once. I won't let it again." When I stepped away from the podium, my legs trembled, but I held my head high. The hall buzzed with murmurs, tension thick as smoke. Rachel hissed at my mother. "Why didn't you tell me she'd do this?" My mother's face was pale, pinched. She wasn't supposed to. Guests avoided eye contact with them, whispering in clusters. A few even glanced toward me, some with shock, others with something gentler. Sympathy, maybe even respect. My father remained silent, his fork untouched, his shoulders hunched. For once, the man who hid behind his newspaper had nowhere to hide. I walked back to my seat, my heart pounding. But David reached out and squeezed my hand as I passed. His grip was steady, grounding me. Behind me, Rachel snapped, her voice rising above the murmurs. "She's trying to ruin my day." But the illusion was already broken. The perfect image had cracked, and everyone in that hall had seen what lay beneath. For the first time, it wasn't me who felt small. It was them. And as I sat down, chest heaving, I realized something unexpected. I didn't need applause or validation, or even their understanding. Speaking the truth had been the victory. The fallout was theirs to carry now. The rest of the gala blurred like a dream I wasn't part of. Conversations whispered behind hands. Eyes flicking between me and my family. Rachel's tight smile stretched thin. The string quartet played again, but their notes sounded strained, like even the music knew the air had shifted. I didn't eat. I couldn't. My stomach twisted with a cocktail of nerves and release. For so long, I had imagined this moment. The exposure, the words tumbling out like stones lifted off my chest. I thought it would feel triumphant, loud, overwhelming. Instead, it felt quiet, heavy, final. David drove me home afterward. The night air was cool through the open window, carrying the faint scent of rain on asphalt. Neither of us spoke much. He kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely in his lap, but his presence was enough. When we pulled into my driveway, he finally said, "You did it." I stared at my house, lights glowing softly in the windows, so different from the cold ballroom I'd just left. "It doesn't feel like victory," I admitted. "It feels like I've set something on fire and just walked away." He looked at me, eyes steady. "Sometimes that's the only way to clear the ground." I nodded, though my chest still ached. After he left, I sat on the porch steps for a long while. The night was alive with crickets, a dog barking in the distance, the occasional car passing on the street. Normal sounds. Comforting in a way. My phone buzzed, messages piling in. Some from guests I barely knew, offering words like brave and strong. Others from numbers I didn't recognize, questions hanging heavy between short lines. "Is it true?" I had no idea. From Rachel, "You've ruined everything." From my mother, "We'll talk later." I didn't reply. For once, I let silence belong to me. The next morning, the sun spilled across my living room floor, painting golden rectangles on the rug. I brewed coffee, the smell rich and grounding. As I stood at the counter, I realized something strange. I could breathe easier. My chest didn't feel locked up anymore. I thought of that hospital room years ago, the rain streaking the window while I wondered if anyone would show up. Back then, I had felt invisible, like my life was disposable. But last night, I stood in a room full of people and made myself seen, heard. The fallout trickled in over the week. Rachel posted photos from the gala with forced captions, "An unforgettable night." But the comments told a different story. "So proud of you, Emily. Wishing you health and strength." The attention she craved slipped sideways, landing on me instead. My mother called once, her voice brittle. "You embarrassed us," she said. "People won't forget this." "They're not supposed to," I replied. And I hung up before she could answer. It wasn't anger I felt anymore, just clarity. I started going on longer walks, breathing in the late summer air, noticing things I used to rush past. The smell of cut grass, the way sunlight dappled through leaves, kids' laughter spilling from a playground. Life felt sharper, fuller, like I'd been living half asleep until now. David stopped by often, sometimes with groceries, sometimes just to sit on the porch and drink iced tea. We didn't talk much about the gala. We didn't need to. He had been there. He knew. One evening, as cicadas buzzed in the trees, he said, "You know you don't owe them anything anymore." I stared at the horizon, the sky blushing pink and orange. "I used to think I had to earn their love," I said. "If I was good enough, quiet enough, maybe they'd see me. But now, I don't need them to. I see myself." The words felt strange, but true. That night, I slept without dreams. No pacing, no staring at the ceiling, no reliving old scenes. Just sleep, deep and unbroken. And when I woke, I knew. The story wasn't about my parents anymore. It wasn't about Rachel or their choices. It was about me, choosing not to be erased. Choosing to exist loudly, fully, even if it meant burning bridges behind me. The fire I lit that night didn't consume me. It cleared a path. A week after the gala, I found myself back at the river near my house. It was the same place I'd gone to as a teenager when the walls of home felt too tight, when I needed somewhere to put my anger and fear. Back then, I'd sit on the bank with knees tucked to my chest, tossing pebbles into the current, and wondering if life would ever carry me anywhere but pain. Now the air was crisp with the first hints of autumn. The water shimmered gold where the sun touched it, rippling in constant, quiet motion. I stood there for a long while, watching the current, and thought about all the versions of myself that had stood here before, sick, abandoned, unseen. For years, I had carried their silence like a stone inside me. I thought it defined me, that being unwanted meant I was unworthy. But last week, standing in that glittering hall, I had laid the stone down. Not gently, not quietly. I dropped it where everyone could see, and it was no longer mine to carry. The world didn't crumble when I spoke. I didn't shatter. I didn't vanish. I stood taller. I bent to pick up a small, flat rock from the riverbank. It was smooth, cool in my palm. I turned it over once before letting it slip into the water. The splash was soft, but it spread ripples across the surface, rings widening and widening until they reached the far bank. That was what truth felt like. Not a roar, not an explosion, but a ripple that kept moving long after the moment had passed. I smiled then, not the polite smile I had worn through years of family dinners, but something real, unforced. I knew the path ahead wouldn't be perfect. There would be more questions, more whispers, more reminders of what I'd lost. But there would also be mornings filled with sunlight, walks where the air smelled like possibility, evenings where laughter came easy, and none of it depended on them. I turned from the river, the wind cool on my face, and started walking home. My steps felt lighter, my chest unburdened. For the first time in years, the future wasn't something I feared. It was mine.